On the third day of our honeymoon, I found my new wife's other phone and discovered she'd been running a con, and I was husband number 4. I found the phone by complete accident, tucked inside a zipper compartment of my wife's suitcase that I'd opened looking for the sunscreen she'd asked me to grab while she was in the shower. We were 3 days into our honeymoon in Bali, staying at this incredible overwater villa that cost me nearly $15,000 for the week, and everything had been absolutely perfect up until the moment my fingers brushed against that small, cheap burner phone hidden beneath her folded sundresses. My first thought was confusion. Why would Sophia have a second phone, and why would she hide it from me? My second thought, the one that made my stomach drop, was that there was only one reason someone hides a burner phone from their spouse, and none of those reasons were good. I pulled it out and stared at it for a long moment, hearing the shower still running in the bathroom, knowing I had maybe 2 minutes before she came out, and I made a decision that would change everything. I turned it on. The phone didn't have a password, which should have been my first red flag that this wasn't about an affair or anything as simple as infidelity. If you're hiding an affair, you password protect everything. But this phone opened immediately to a home screen with just a few apps, a messaging service I didn't recognize, a notes app, and what looked like some kind of encrypted email client. My hands were shaking as I opened the messages first, and what I found there made absolutely no sense for about 30 seconds until my brain caught up with what I was actually reading. There were conversations with someone named M about the mark, about the timeline, about extraction dates and account access. There were discussions about my bank accounts, my investment portfolio, my family's business holdings. And there, in a message dated 2 weeks before a wedding, was a sentence that made the entire world tilt sideways. Target for is fully committed. Wedding scheduled for June 15th. Estimated take $2.3 million liquid assets plus property. Timeline 6 to 8 months maximum. Target for. I was target for. My wife of 3 days. The woman I'd been dating for 18 months and had proposed on a beach in the Maldives. The woman who cried when I'd asked her to marry me and told me I was the love of her life. That woman was running some kind of long-term con, and I was apparently the 4th man she'd done this to. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, still holding that phone, and I felt this weird disconnection from reality, like I was watching this happen to someone else instead of living it myself. The shower turned off in the bathroom, and I heard Sophia humming something cheerful, and I had maybe 60 seconds to decide what to do with what I just learned. I could confront her immediately, but then what? She'd deny it, or spin some story, or disappear before I could protect my assets or figure out the full scope of what she was planning. So instead, I did something that probably saved my entire financial future. I took pictures of everything on that phone, every message, every contact, every note, every email, and then I put it back exactly where I'd found it, zipped the compartment closed, grabbed the sunscreen, and sat down on the balcony like nothing had happened. Sophia came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her dark hair wet and curling around her shoulders, and she smiled at me with what I thought just 10 minutes ago was genuine love and affection. "Did you find the sunscreen?" she asked, and her voice was warm and sweet, and exactly the same as it had always been. I held up and smiled back at her, and it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, because what I really wanted to do was scream at her, demand answers, ask her who the hell she really was. But I didn't. I just said, "Found it. You want to head down to the beach?" And she nodded and kissed me, and I kissed her back while my mind was racing through everything I just read, trying to figure out what to do next. I spent the rest of that day in a state of surreal disconnection, going through the motions of being a happy newlywed, while internally freaking out about the fact that my wife was apparently a professional con artist who'd married me to steal my money. We had lunch at this beautiful beachside restaurant, and Sophia talked about how happy she was, how perfect everything was, how she couldn't wait to start our life together. And I smiled and held her hand and ordered another drink because I needed something to take the edge off the panic that was threatening to overwhelm me. Every time she touched me, every time she looked at me with those big brown eyes, every time she said, "I love you," I heard that message in my head: Target Force fully committed. That night, after Sophia fell asleep, I locked myself in the bathroom with my phone and started going through the pictures I'd taken of her burner phone messages. There was so much information there that it took me hours to piece together. But gradually a picture emerged that was so much worse than I'd initially thought. Sophia, if that was even her real name, was part of what looked like an organized operation. The person she was messaging with, this M person, seemed to be coordinating multiple cons simultaneously. There were references to other targets in various stages, other women working similar schemes, and what looked like a sophisticated money laundering operation to move and hide stolen assets. The Notes app had detailed information about me, my net worth, my business holdings, my family relationships, my vulnerabilities and insecurities that she'd apparently been cataloging since we met. But the worst part, the part that made me actually nauseous sitting there on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, was a file labeled Previous Targets. I opened it and found detailed summaries of 3 other men. David Chun, married for 7 months before Sophia divorced him and disappeared with $1.8 million. Marcus Webb, married for 5 months before similar pattern. And James Rodriguez, who'd been married to her for almost a year before she cleaned out his accounts and vanished. Each summary included photographs, financial details, and notes about what had worked and what hadn't in each con. There were lessons learned, strategies refined, techniques improved. This was an amateur hour. This was someone who'd turned romance fraud into a sophisticated, profitable profession. I sat there staring at those names, at those men who'd been exactly where I was now, and I thought about how careful I'd been, how I'd done everything right. I'd met Sophia at a charity gala, introduced by mutual friends who'd vouched for her. She'd worked as an event planner, or so she'd said, and she'd seemed to have her own money, her own career, her own independent life. She'd never asked me for money, never seemed interested in my wealth, never pushed for access to my accounts. She'd been patient, building trust slowly over 18 months, meeting my family, becoming part of my life in ways that felt organic and real. And now I understood that this was exactly the strategy, that the long game was her specialty, that she'd been playing me from the very first conversation we'd had. I needed help, and I needed it from someone who understood both the legal and the practical aspects of what I was dealing with. So at 6 a.m. Bali time, I called my lawyer Richard back in San Francisco, woke him up at 2 p.m. his time, and told him everything. To his credit, Richard didn't waste time with questions about whether I was sure or suggesting couples counseling. He just said, "Don't let her know you know. Don't change your behavior at all. I'm going to make some calls, and I'll get back to you within 4 hours with a plan." Then he paused and added, "Michael, I need you to understand something. If what you're telling me is accurate, your wife is a professional criminal who's probably done this multiple times. You can't confront her, you can't tip her off, and you absolutely cannot trust anything she says or does from this moment forward. Everything is an act, and the moment she realizes you know, she'll either disappear with whatever she can grab or she'll escalate in ways we can't predict." Those words, "everything is an act," kept echoing in my head for the rest of the honeymoon. I had to keep pretending everything was fine, had to keep playing the role of the happy newlywed, had to keep having sex with her and telling her I loved her and making plans for our future together, all while knowing that none of it was real, that I was essentially sleeping next to a stranger who'd been systematically manipulating me for 18 months. It was one of the most psychologically exhausting experiences of my life, like being in a play where only I knew the script had changed, but I still had to hit all my marks and deliver all my lines convincingly. Richard called me back that afternoon while Sophia was at the hotel spa. Another $500 I was paying for, I thought bitterly, and he'd assembled what he called an emergency response team. He'd contacted a private investigator who specialized in romance fraud, a forensic accountant to audit all my financial accounts and trace any irregularities, and a criminal attorney who'd worked with the FBI on organized fraud cases. The plan was this. I'd finished the honeymoon acting like nothing was wrong, giving them time to investigate Sophia's real identity and build a case. The moment we landed back in San Francisco, I'd be served with annulment papers that Richard was already preparing. All my accounts would be frozen and moved to new institutions Sophia didn't know about, and a private investigator would deliver all the evidence to both the local police and the FBI. The key was that Sophia couldn't know any of this was happening until we were back on U.S. soil where the authorities could actually arrest her. Can you do it? Richard asked me, can you spend the next 4 days pretending you don't know anything? And I told him yes, because what choice did I have? If I confronted her now, she'd disappear, probably with whatever money she'd already managed to access. If I let her know I was on to her, she might have contingency plans I couldn't anticipate. The only way to protect myself and potentially save the other men she was clearly planning to target in the future was to play along until we were somewhere the law could actually help me. Those next 4 days were absolute hell. Every moment with Sophia felt like torture. Every touch felt like a violation. Every "I love you" felt like a knife in my chest. We went on excursions to temples and rice terraces. We had romantic dinners on the beach. We celebrated being newlyweds with champagne and sunset photos. And the whole time I was screaming internally. At night, after she fell asleep, I'd go through the pictures I'd taken of her burner phone over and over again, memorizing details, looking for clues about who she really was. I found references to her real name in one message, Katerina Volkov, probably Russian or Eastern European based on name, and references to at least 2 other identities she'd used in previous cons. The private investigator Richard had hired was good. Within 2 days, he'd sent me a preliminary report on my encrypted email that detailed some of what he'd found. Katerina Volkov was indeed her real name. She was 34 years old. She'd been working romance cons for at least 8 years across multiple states, and she had warrants out for fraud in 3 different jurisdictions under different aliases. The mutual friends who'd introduced us at that charity gala, they were part of the operation. They'd been paid to establish her credibility and vouch for her background. The event planning business she supposedly ran, it was a front with no actual clients, just a website and some fake portfolio pieces. Even her apartment, the one I'd spent so many nights in over the past 18 months, was a short-term rental that she'd furnished specifically to look like the home of a successful, independent professional woman. Everything was fake. Every single thing about the woman I'd married was a carefully constructed lie designed to separate me from my money. And the worst part was how good she was at it. If I hadn't accidentally found that phone, if I had been even slightly less careful about my finances, she probably would have succeeded. The con was designed to play out over 6 to 8 months of marriage, long enough to establish legal claims of marital assets, short enough to extract everything and disappear before I fully understood what was happening. She would have slowly gained access to accounts, moved money in ways that seemed legitimate, possibly even got me to make investments in fake business opportunities that were really just ways to transfer assets to accounts she controlled. And then one day I would have come home to find her gone, my accounts drained, and no legal recourse because by the time I figured out, she'd be in another country under another name running the same con on Target 5. On our last night in Bali, Sophia wanted to go to this famous cliffside restaurant for a final romantic dinner. We sat there watching the sunset over the Indian Ocean, and she held my hand across the table and told me how happy she was, how much she loved me, how excited she was to start our life together. And I looked at her face, this beautiful face I thought I knew, and I tried to see Katerina Volkov underneath Sophia Martinez. I tried to see the con artist, the criminal, the woman who'd done this to at least 3 other men and was planning to do it to me. But all I could see was my wife, and that made it so much worse somehow. "What are you thinking about?" she asked me, and she had this concerned look on her face like she could sense something was off. And I smiled and said, "Just about how lucky I am. About how I can't believe you're really mine." And she squeezed my hand and said, "I'm the lucky one. You're everything I've ever wanted." And I thought about how those words were probably true in a way she didn't mean. I was everything she'd wanted in a target. Wealthy enough to make the effort worthwhile, trusting enough to be easy to manipulate, isolated enough from family that there weren't too many people asking questions about her background. We flew back to San Francisco the next morning, and the whole flight I was tense, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for her to somehow realize that I knew. But she just slept on my shoulder and occasionally woke up to kiss me and tell me she loved me. And it was such a perfect performance that if I didn't know better, I'd have believed every word. We landed at SFO at noon on a Tuesday, and I texted Richard from the baggage claim while Sophia was in the bathroom. His response was immediate. Everything is ready. Stick to the plan. The plan was that we'd take separate cars home. I told Sophia I needed to stop by my office to handle some urgent business issues that had come up while we were gone, and she was going to go straight to our apartment to start unpacking. She'd kissed me goodbye at the airport, told me she'd make us a nice dinner for our first night back, and took an Uber to what she thought was our home, but what was actually about to become a crime scene. Because the moment her car pulled away, Richard's team moved in. I didn't go to my office. Instead, I went straight to Richard's downtown law office where the forensic accountant, the private investigator, and the criminal attorney were all waiting with everything they compiled over the past 4 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The private investigator had not only traced Sophia's real identity, but had managed to locate 2 of her previous victims, David Chun and Marcus Webb, both of whom were willing to testify about what she'd done to them. David had lost his entire savings, his house, and his business to her con. Marcus had been so devastated by the betrayal that he'd attempted suicide and spent 6 months in psychiatric treatment. Both of them had tried to report her to the police, but by the time they figured out what happened, she'd disappeared so thoroughly that the authorities couldn't find her. The forensic accountant had found evidence of small, exploratory accesses to my accounts that I'd never noticed, tiny transfers that had been reversed, password reset attempts, authorized user requests that had been initiated but not completed. Sophia had been testing the waters, figuring out my banking security, preparing for the larger theft that would have come in the following months. She'd been patient and careful, but she left digital traces that a professional could follow. And the criminal attorney had already been in contact with the FBI's fraud division, who were very interested in Sophia/Katerina's operation because they'd been tracking what they suspected was a larger criminal network doing exactly this type of long-term romance fraud. While I was sitting in Richard's office going over all of this, Sophia was being arrested at our apartment. The police had a warrant based on the evidence from her burner phone and the testimony from her previous victims, and they'd timed it so that she'd be taken into custody before she had any chance to run. Richard had someone recording the arrest, and he showed me the video later. Sophia being read her rights. Sophia claiming there was some mistake. Sophia demanding to call her lawyer. Sophia finally being put in the back of a police car looking genuinely shocked and frightened in a way I'd never seen from her before. For the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't performing. She was actually scared. The annulment paperwork was filed that same day, along with a restraining order that prevented Sophia from contacting me or coming anywhere near me or my property. My accounts were all frozen and transferred to new institutions. My apartment locks were changed. My credit was frozen. Every possible financial vulnerability was locked down tight. And then I did something that Richard advised against, but that I felt I needed to do. I wrote a letter to Sophia in jail, and I told her that I knew everything. I told her I'd found the phone. I'd documented everything. I'd given it all to the authorities. I told her about David and Marcus, and how they'd both agreed to testify. And I told her that unlike her previous targets, I wasn't going to just let her disappear and move on to the next victim. I was going to make sure she faced actual consequences for what she'd done. The trial took almost a year to make its way through the courts, and it was brutal. Sophia's defense attorney tried everything, claimed she was a real victim, that I'd manipulated her, that the evidence was fabricated, that her previous victims were lying as part of some conspiracy. But the evidence was too strong. The burner phone messages, the testimonies from David and Marcus, the forensic accountant that showed the pattern of her attempting to access my accounts, The FBI's investigation into the larger fraud network she was part of, all of it combined to paint a picture of someone who'd made a career out of manipulating and robbing vulnerable men. The thing that really sealed her conviction was when the FBI managed to track down M, the person she'd been coordinating with in those messages. His real name was Mikhail Sokolov, and he turned out to be running a romance fraud operation across 3 states with 6 different women working for him, including Sophia. He'd recruited her 8 years ago when she was working as a cocktail waitress in Las Vegas, taught her the techniques, provided her with fake identities and documents, and took 50% of everything she stole. When the FBI offered him a deal to testify against Sophia and the other women in his operation, he took it without hesitation, and his testimony devastated any remaining credibility Sophia's defense might have had. She was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison, and she'd have to serve at least 85% before being eligible for parole. David and Marcus were both in the courtroom when the sentence was read, and I saw something like relief wash over both their faces. This woman who destroyed their lives, who'd stolen from them and betrayed them and left them broken, she was finally facing justice. It didn't give them back what they'd lost, but at least she wouldn't be able to do it to anyone else for a very long time. The annulment was granted based on fraud. The marriage had never been valid because it was based on false pretenses and criminal intent. I got back the money I'd spent on the wedding and the honeymoon as part of the criminal restitution, though honestly, money was the least of what this experience cost me. The real cost was psychological, emotional, the damage to my ability to trust anyone ever again. For months after the arrest, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, kept replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out what was real and what was performance. My therapist told me this was a form of PTSD, that being manipulated that thoroughly by someone you thought loved you does real psychological damage that takes years to heal. It's been 3 years now since I found that phone in Bali. Sophia's in federal prison in Oregon, serving her 12-year sentence. Mikhail Sokolov is serving 15 years in a different facility. 4 of the other women in their operation were convicted on similar charges. The FBI told me they identified at least 37 victims across 8 states who've been targeted by this network, with total losses exceeding $16 million. Some of those men have gotten some of their money back through restitution, but most of it was already gone, moved through offshore accounts and laundering operations that made it impossible to recover. I'm doing better now. I'm back to dating, though I'm much more careful, much more skeptical, much more aware of the ways people can manipulate and deceive. I run background checks on anyone I go out with more than twice. I keep my finances completely separate until I'm absolutely certain I know who someone really is. And I never, ever ignore that little voice in my head when something doesn't quite add up, because that voice was there during my relationship with Sophia too. I just didn't listen to it because I wanted so badly to believe that what we had was real. David Chun and I have become friends, bonded by the shared experience of having been targeted by the same woman. We meet for coffee every few months and talk about the recovery process, about learning to trust again, about how to move forward from something like this. He's remarried now to a woman he knew in college, someone with a completely documented, verifiable life history, who thinks his caution is justified rather than paranoid. Marcus Webb moved across the country and changed careers entirely. He said he needed to start completely over somewhere nobody knew his story. I understand that impulse. Even though I chose to stay in San Francisco and rebuild my life here, the hardest part isn't the financial loss or even the betrayal itself. It's the questioning of reality that comes after. When someone can fake loving you that convincingly for 18 months, when someone can lie to your face every single day and you never suspect a thing, it makes you doubt your own judgment in fundamental ways. How do you trust yourself to read people accurately when you were that thoroughly fooled? How do you open your heart to someone new when you know how completely someone can deceive you? These are questions I'm still working through in therapy and probably will be for a long time. But I also try to remember that I'm not the victim here in the sense of being helpless or broken. I found that phone. I documented everything. I protected my assets. I worked with law enforcement to ensure Sophia faced justice. I stopped her from hurting anyone else. And I'm rebuilding my life with the wisdom that comes from having survived something like this. I'm more careful now, yes, but I'm also more aware of my own strength, my own resilience, my own ability to handle crisis and come out the other side. The burner phone is in an evidence locker somewhere, but I have all those pictures I took that morning in Bali saved on an encrypted hard drive. Sometimes I look through them, not because I enjoy the pain, but because I need to remember that it was real, that I didn't imagine it, that my suspicions were justified. It's a reminder that trusting your instincts isn't paranoia. Sometimes that little voice that says something's wrong is the only thing standing between you and complete devastation. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found that phone. Sophia's plan probably would have worked. She was that good, that patient, that convincing. I'd have woken up one day 6 months into our marriage to find her gone and my account's empty, and I have spent years trying to figure out what happened. Probably blaming myself. Probably never getting any justice or closure. Finding that phone, as devastating as it was, gave me the chance to protect myself and to ensure that she faced consequences. It gave me back control of the narrative in my life. Sophia wrote me a letter from prison about 6 months into her sentence. I debated whether to read it, but eventually curiosity won out. She said she was sorry, not for what she'd done, but for getting caught. She said she'd actually like me more than her other targets. That parts of our relationship had been real for her, even if the underlying purpose wasn't. She said she hoped I'd be able to forgive her someday. I threw the letter away without responding. There's nothing she could say that would make any difference. No apology that could undo 18 months of calculated deception. She made choices, and now she's living with the consequences of those choices. That's justice, even if it doesn't heal all the wounds she created. I keep the annulment papers in a folder with the court documents from her trial, and sometimes I take them out and read through them. Not because I need the reminder that the marriage wasn't real. I know that now with absolute clarity, but because I need to remember that I survived this, that I was smart enough and strong enough and lucky enough to catch on before it was too late, that I took control of the situation where I was supposed to be the victim and I turned it around, that I'm not defined by having been targeted by a con artist. I'm defined by how I responded when I discovered the truth. The marriage lasted 3 days. The recovery will probably last a lifetime. But I'm still here, still building a life, still capable of love even if I'm more careful about who I give it to now. Sophia may have stolen my money and my trust in 18 months of my life, but she didn't destroy me. And in some ways, surviving this made me stronger than I would have been if it had never happened. I know who I am now in ways I didn't before. I know what I'm capable of handling. I know that I can trust my own judgment, even when reality turns out to be something completely different from what I thought it was. That phone is still in evidence. But the pictures I took that morning in Bali are backed up in 3 different locations. Not as trophies, but as proof. Proof that I saw the truth when it revealed itself. Proof that I acted decisively to protect myself. Proof that I'm the kind of person who doesn't ignore red flags just because acknowledging them is painful. Those pictures represent the moment everything changed, the moment I stopped being target for and became the person who caught Katerina Volkov and made sure she faced justice. 3 days. That's how long I was married before I discovered my wife was a professional con artist who'd married me to steal my money. And while those 3 days cost me a lot, financially, emotionally, psychologically, they also taught me more about human nature, about deception, about resilience, and about myself than I had learned in the previous 38 years of my life. I wish I'd never met Sophia, never fallen for her lies, never had to go through the trauma of discovering that everything I thought was real was carefully constructed fiction. But since I did go through it, I'm choosing to take the lessons, the strength, and the wisdom that came from surviving it and build something better with what I learned.